Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So last week I talked about the first book in the 13th Child series, and this is, shockingly, the second book in that trilogy. So this time we have an actual picture on the cover instead of just a stylized dragon and a lot of Gothic writing. So this picks up more or less where the last book left off. Now, what I didn't say about the last book is that the last book has a very dramatic climax in which the fact that Eff Rothmer has been studying two different kinds of magic, that is, African magic as well as Avrupan magic, because one of her teachers is a black woman who is the daughter of one former African slave and an African freedom worker person who had been working at freeing slaves in the southern Colombian states. Anyways, she was taught by both. She was taught both the European and African magics, Avrupan and African. And because she was able to look at things from two different perspectives, it allowed her to effectively stop a particular plague of bugs that had come in and was destroying everything. That basically there were these bugs that kind of ate magic, and you needed magic to enter the final stage of their life cycle. And when they entered the final stage of their life cycle, they would, well, suck magic up. And what she basically figured out how to do was to stop them by, in effect, making them eat the magic of bugs in their final life cycle so that it would create a chain reaction of them sucking the magic out of the last life cycle stage bugs, thus killing them, and creating a cycle that would sort of stop all of the bugs from destroying things. And in the process, she saved a whole bunch of lives, including her brothers. And anyways, when it's all over, at the start of this book, she's suddenly become something of a heroine locally because she figured out a whole bunch of things. And between that and the fact that the entirety of the first book, she had been spending that whole first book sitting there marinating in her sense of inadequacy and her belief that she was going to someday turn evil, by the end of that first book, she's finally gotten past that. She's realized that she is a person, that her being number 13 does not define her, and also her doing this has proved that she can do interesting and exciting things. She's even found a sort of a career path, a thing that she wants to do with herself, and that is she wants to work as the assistant to a couple of the professors at the local college/university who study animals and things west of the Great Barrier. Now, the Great Barrier, the titular Great Barrier, is a magic spell that was put in place by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. That they had basically created a gigantic magical shield that runs along what I gather to be the Mississippi River. I could be wrong because I'm not sure that there are any maps in the series, or at least I don't recall seeing it to compare to a regular North American map. But from what I gather, you have something like the Mississippi River, and it runs along the Mississippi River, which everybody calls the Mammoth River, all the way along up and over through the Great Lakes and up the St. Lawrence River. And what you have is this massive magical shield that keeps all of the really dangerous stuff from crossing into the regular settled areas. Now, people are gradually spreading out past this so-called Great Barrier, but it means that crossing the Great Barrier is crossing a particular Rubicon. You're crossing this line where on the one side you can trust that there won't be a mammoth, you can trust that there won't be these sphinx cats and saber-tooths and all of these magical creatures like swarming weasels, which is a terrifying thought, um, that appear on the other side. And so going across the Great Barrier, it's dangerous because you're not just stepping into frontier territory, you are stepping across something that it's kind of like going onto the other side of the Great Wall of China. It's a big deal because there's a lot of dangerous stuff on the other side. So Eff manages to, in the first book, she has crossed the Great Barrier the one time, going to the rationalist settlement, which I mentioned the rationalists last week. They're kind of like these weird atheist scientist Amish people. And in that first book, we see the ways in which they're like, one of the problematic ways in which they're like the Amish, because the Amish have certain reputations of kindness and goodness of heart and things like that. But the fact is that to be in an enclave like that, it's extremely exclusionary, and if you are there because you hold a particular philosophical view, it can lead to a whole lot of insularity and a whole lot of othering of the rest of the world. And in that first book, we see this when Eff and her father and brother go on a visit to check out why it is that this rationalist settlement hasn't been having problems with these so-called mirror bugs. And when they get there, everybody is constantly sneering down their noses and saying things like, oh, you've brought magicians. And they're saying that in the same way that you would say prostitute or dancer or actress. Because as we all know, actress and dancer are synonymous with prostitute. And if you don't think so, then you need to read some more history books because, yeah. Anyways, so the thing is that the rationalists, they proved that you can survive on the far side of the Great Barrier without magic, but they're a subplot, and they're kind of an investigation into what happens when you get a whole bunch of very, very similar people together and into an echo chamber, and what happens in that echo chamber, which is, the internet. But it's also what happens when you get people with similar philosophical viewpoints just isolating themselves in one area. Anyway, be that as it may, crossing the Great Barrier is a big thing in this book because Eff gets herself onto a brief scientific expedition that they're going to go out for a couple of months, and they're going to, review various pieces of whatchamacallem, of animals that they find, any new animals that they discover, to look at the numbers and distributions of various plants, and just to see what there is, and to do some kind of a survey, because there hasn't been a lot of that. Mostly because people who are going out there into the wilds tend to be people who are settlers, and settlers aren't really all that interested in saying, I have counted exactly this many kinds of hexberries in this one plot of land, and in the next plot of land there's a different number of hexberries, and this has changed from season to season in this way. They really aren't tracking that because they don't care, because they are settlers and they're really more interested in not dying because a short-faced bear came there. Yes, they are short-faced bears. Isn't that terrifying? Short-faced bears are bigger than grizzly bears. That's, like, horrifying. Anyways, so Eff Rothmer goes on this, and it is in the course of this that they find a stream bed that is chock full of animals that have been turned into stone. At first they think it's a bunch of stone statues that somebody left out there, and, somebody must have made it that far out. But then they discover that if you crack the statues open, you discover that on the interior of the statue are things like complete vascular systems. And so it's sort of a strange and worrying thought that there might be something out there that could turn an animal into stone. And what happens in the course of this also, though, is that Eff Rothmer, over the course of the previous book and this book, has developed an acquaintanceship with Wash, who is a circuit rider. That is, he is a magician whose job is to travel from settlement to settlement to give them a little bit of help here and there, help them with boosting up their spells or taking messages or what have you. And he sort of has taken her a bit under her wing because she had expressed so much concern about her control over her magic. And the necklace that she's wearing is actually a necklace that he gives her, which is an old African teaching tool. The other big thing, though, that happens in this book, as I rush over to my next point, is that this is a book where we suddenly see the after effects of the childhood. Because you'd think, oh, she's over it. She's over the whole, I'm 13th, so I'm going to be evil thing. But the side effects can be insidious. And one of the ways that it's insidious is she has a huge amount of trouble with her magic, with her European magic, her Avrupan magic, the way that they cast spells. And it isn't until her professor tries to make her cast a particular preservation spell on a particular jar that she realizes that she hasn't been having trouble with her magic. She'd been giving up. She had been assuming, oh, when I cast the spell and it fails, it's failing because I suck. When in point of fact, the problem was that she wasn't putting in the effort anymore because she had assumed that she would be so bad at it. And Professor Torgerson sits Eff down and makes her cast a spell over and over and over again until she gets it right. And that moment is revelatory for Eff because she had always thought, oh, well, I'm a terrible magician, until Professor Torgerson made her sit down and do these spells, which was when Eff realized it's not that she was terrible, it was that her own psychology had worked against her. And it's this wonderful carryover from the problems of the first book, from the problems of nobody paid attention to her, from her assumptions that she's a terrible person. They all sort of came together in a confluence that made her believe things about herself so that she wouldn't bother trying. And it wasn't that anybody told her not to try, and it wasn't that anybody would have told her any bad things about herself. It was that her low self-esteem, combined with the fact that everybody was constantly focusing on her twin brother, it all made her think that her problems weren't worth asking about, weren't worth working on, and that her problems could not be worked on. And so you have this whole section of the book where she has to set herself to relearning how to cast all of these really, really basic fundamental spells properly, because she'd cheated and used her African magic to effectively force her spells to work the way they ought to. And it's really, really interesting because this also lays the groundwork for something that happens in the next book, which I will talk about in the next book. But this book then climaxes again. First of all, her brother manages to cause a massive disaster because he is an overconfident jerk about a bunch of things. But this climaxes with them finding the animals that turn other creatures into stone. And she's part of the group that runs across them, that finds them, that helps deal with them. And yeah, that's everything for this book, because it all comes to a big head in the next book, which I will talk to you all about next week.